So doing those last two, our first problem is that we have a quotient, so we usually want to try to get rid of that quotient. And what I'm seeing right off the bat is an opportunity to use my Pythagorean identities. The bottom one, again, is straightforward. We know that the cotangent squared of x is cosecant squared of x. So that one's automatic. So that one, we can rewrite that as cosecant squared. The top, if we take our cosine squared x plus our sine squared x equals 1, if I subtract the sine squared x, then what I'm basically looking at here is another way to write cosine squared. So we have cosine squared x. Okay, so the good news is I don't have any 1 minuses or 1 pluses, but I still have a quotient. So perhaps here the best way to work with this is to rewrite things in terms of cosine is already cosine, but the bottom, that would be 1 over the sine squared x. So multiplying by a reciprocal, we basically get cosine squared x times the sine squared x. Okay? Are there other ways we can continue to simplify that? Sure. We can come back over here and maybe replace the cosine squared x with that, and we get 1 minus the sine squared x, right, times the sine squared x. And so we'd end up getting sine squared x minus sine to the 4th x. Right, so a lot of things we can do, but I'm going to say we were done there. But this kind of gets us into other areas where, if we really don't know what we want to simplify to, where do we stop? All right, and that's obviously a problem in some areas, but kind of cool in the others, since we can kind of just continue to rewrite. But we have all the things we wanted, right? We have the arguments the same. We had two trig expressions. We still have 2, but there's no quotients now. And so everything that we usually want in rewriting, so there's no quotients, arguments the same. We have the fewest amount of trig functions I can rewrite it in, and so we're pretty good there. All right, so safe and ready to move on to the next problem. And again, I would say we were done there, but depending, we could go here, or we could write sine in terms of cosine and write it. I think that would be cosine to the 4th. Right, so there's all kinds of stuff we can do there. All right, but we'll stop there. The next one's a little more difficult. All right, because again, the problem here is that we have a quotient, and we also have a minus sign. So it's not as simple as just rewriting this cosine out of there. The trick to this is to use what's called the conjugate. Right, the conjugate is basically, if we have a difference, it's a sum. If we have a sum, it's a difference, but the two terms are the same. So here I'm subtracting 1 in cosine, here I'm adding 1 in cosine. So how does this help us out? Well, check it out. The top becomes 1 plus cosine of x, and the bottom is 1 minus cosine of x times 1 plus cosine of x. Of course, this is the difference of squares. So we have 1 plus cosine upstairs, and we have basically 1 minus cosine squared x downstairs. Of course, this is basically that in reverse. So this becomes 1 plus the cosine of x all over sine squared x. All right, and we still have that quotient, but what I can now do, unlike where if we have a subtraction or addition on the bottom, when I have it on the top, I can break this up into 2 fractions. So this is 1 over sine squared and cosine of x over sine squared of x. This becomes cosecant squared x, and we're adding, this is, how about I write this as 1 over sine times cosine over sine. And so we get cosecant squared x plus the cosecant of x times, this would be cotangent of x. All right, and you might argue that we're not simplified in one respect because we only had one trig value, and then after simplifying it, I now have 3. But what I have solved is the situation where I no longer have a quotient. All right, so we might have made things worse in one respect, but as far as clearing out that quotient, which is something we often want to do, I was able to clear out that quotient. All right, is there a better way to simplify this? Maybe. All right, if we sat here and thought about it. But here's the trick that I wanted to show you, right? And here I am just following through on that trick and trying to rewrite it. I was constantly trying to eliminate the quotient. So still had the quotient, still had the quotient, still had the quotient, still had the quotient, and then we finally got rid of the quotient. It's usually, that's the big guy. Let's get rid of the quotients. Let's make sure that all my arguments are the same, and then the rest is just details. Alrighty? So there you have it. So there's our rewrite and our simplification. That pretty much wraps up the big ideas for section 5.1. Of course, this takes a lot of practice, so make sure you're working, make sure you're dialoguing, talk to each other on Canvas, learn from each other, learn from your mistakes, because the better you can get at rewriting and seeing our Pythagorean identities in a little bit of different light, the better you're going to get at things that are coming up later in this chapter. Alrighty, so I'll see you guys then. We'll move on to 5.2. As usual, if you have questions, you better ask. See me for an office hour, ask on Canvas, send me an email, whatever it takes to keep your learning progress going. Talk to you guys later.